Hey, what's happening, everybody? Mike here with the official HuntBetter Podcast, where our mission is to preserve the culture of hunting while promoting the art of woodsmanship. Hey, today we're hanging out with one of my great friends and seriously the best mountain buck hunter that I know personally, Mr. Nathan Killen. And I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're like me, you've learned so much from Nathan over the last few years. And every time I talk to Nathan, I'm just blown away by his depth of knowledge, which is oftentimes hard to put into words. And actually in this episode, you'll hear us talk about this instinctual side of hunting and how most of the time you just have to put in the work, grind it out, and let the woods and the critters that live there teach you and help you develop that instinctual element of hunting. Because you know what? That's the one tool in your toolbox that can honestly make you more lethal than everybody else. But you got to work for it, as you'll hear Nathan mention in the podcast today. So all that said, I'm so thankful to call Nathan a dear friend, and I hope that you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Let's get into the podcast. How you been, man? How's the off season going? How was any kind of postseason scouting? What's going on?
It's been going really good. Back in December, I actually located what I would consider the picture perfect buck for the Virginia mountains. I mean, he's a real hammer, and but I've been shed hunting, trying to locate his sheds. I actually found one. It's been actually 3 weeks tomorrow, but. Finally found one of his sheds, and I've been looking for the other one, and I haven't been able to locate it. But I put a lot of the pieces of his puzzle together, so it's pretty much just waiting on season to get here now. So
yeah, what's your approach then? What's going to be? I mean, do you have is it like set up a game plan? Does it change anything that you wouldn't have been doing?
Not really. I've got a lot of trees prepped in and around his core area. And so now I'm basically just going to run trail cameras throughout the summer and verify that he is still there and, see what he's going to look like. So I'm excited for that.
That is exciting.
Yeah.
What makes you so comfortable in the hills? Is it that you've just been doing it the whole time? Or do you bounce around to big woods? Do you bounce around to swamps and things like that? Or are you mainly in the hills? Is that why you're so comfortable, you think?
No, I'm just mainly in the hills and mountains. And matter of fact, I hunt Ohio a little bit too. And I could choose a lot of areas, other areas of the state, but I choose the area that pretty much suits what I'm used to. I love hunting the mountains. I've never hunted swamps or anything like that, or big agriculture type areas, So I don't know. I mean, This season will be 41 years hunting them. I'll be 50 years old this summer. So if I haven't learned anything in, those 41 seasons, then I'd probably be a pretty shabby hunter. So, but, I've just got a lot of experience doing it, trial and error, just like everybody else, and eventually you figure some things out.
Yeah, I think you got the hills figured out, man.
Yeah, I really enjoy them, the low deer densities and just, the nature of mountain hunting itself, both of them lend to, tough hunting, but I enjoy, the struggle. So, the saying, embrace the suck, you pretty much, that's what you have to do here, but it's very, very rewarding when everything comes together for you. So,
yeah, for sure. So I grew up hunting public land with my dad, and walking 2 miles, I've talked about this on the show before, but walking 2 miles on a Saturday morning, I'm 9 years old, it was just a normal thing. And so, before hunting public land became this real popular thing to do in the last few years, doing those things, that grind, that suck that you're talking about, it was just a normal thing. Yeah. It was just normal. When you go hunting, that's what you expect. It wasn't anything weird. And do you think it's that way with the hills for you? I mean, when I think about going and hunting the steep hills, it's like, oh man, I really got to be in the right frame of mind. But that's normal to you, yeah?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's not only physically tough, but it's mentally challenging too. And to be honest with you, I feel like the mentally challenging part is tougher than the physical part of it. You kind of get used to the physical part of it, and you kind of get used to not seeing very many deer, but it, whenever you do go somewhere where there's, a lot better population of deer, it seems a lot easier then. So, but even hunting places like that, I still, look forward to coming back to my mountains, so.
Yeah. What are some things that, like terrain features, that just get you super excited? Because you read all this stuff and it's like everybody's going to be in saddles. Saddles are no good anymore. Do you believe that, or
that there's certain terrain features that growing up everybody tells you to hunt, and so everybody naturally tends to go to those type of places, and eventually deer figure all that stuff out and start avoiding those type of places. But the type of places that I really like are steep country that joins some more flatter type places, because at night the deer are going to end up most of the time in those flatter type places, and especially the mature bucks, they'll regress back into the steeper places during the daylight hours. So and I like secondary ridges. Those excite me. Here in Southwest Virginia, where I actually live, most of our ridges, or the main ridges anyway, run east to west. And so, there's not very many of these topographic features, but I like the east end or east face of these main ridges, that they're kind of hard to find. But usually when you do find them, they're pretty good, and there's usually a good buck living around them. So,
all right, so secondary points. You were saying you think they bet on them.
Yes.
Or they bet on them.
Yeah.
I think about mapping trophy bucks, Brad Herndon, just a classic. He talks about them being more like an on-ramp to come on those, to like get on the freeway of the ridge. Do you see that too?
Yeah, well, I mean, sort of, somewhat, I guess you could say, because, once they go out on those secondary ridges and bed, then once they get up to move, well, sometimes it really depends, to be honest with you, because a lot of the areas that I hunt will have farmland down off the ridges in the valleys. So, if there's no acorns up in the upper elevations of the main ridge, then they may drop off of those points, to go downhill. But, if you have acorns, along the top of the mountain or main ridges, then yes, they'll be going, leaving those secondary ridges and making their way up toward the top of the ridge. So,
yeah, that's really what I see around here. When I started focusing on that, maybe 3 years ago, I started, my encounters immediately started rising. And they were doing exactly, it's not often that you read an article or read a book or something like that. But I like those old dusty books that people have kind of forgotten about. But man, it was like one of those things where I read it and I put it into practice. It was like immediately saw something. And so I just have this love for secondary points now. But speaking of acorns, we were talking about this the other week. So I would consider what you hunt big woods, big woods, hill country. How do you run into when it's a good year of acorns, zeroing in on where they're going to be?
Well, in years that we have an abundance of acorns, a lot of people don't like that, but I personally do, because then, your buck is going to be where he feels the most comfortable at. If the acorns, don't coincide with where he's the most comfortable at, then he has to move out there and go to where they are, But, that's my preferred situation. But I also like spotty acorns too, because then it's easy to figure out where they're going to, But, the way that I scout during the winter, I'm scouting where the acorns were this past fall. So wherever I find him, the sign that he left over back in the winter. And so hopefully the same type of acorn crop that we had then is replicated the next year, and it just makes it a lot more simpler, But, I believe, to me, worst case scenario is no acorn crop at all, because then, unless you have grass pretty close by or some cutovers or anything like that, then they can be pretty hard to find, and the deer just really spread out then.
What's your strategy in saying, this is where I'm going to set up? I think about Bobby Worthington saying, like, there's, I think it was Bobby that said that, like, there's one tree that I got to find, and that's my whole job. How do you zone in?
Well, during my winter scouting, I'm looking, let's just say I like hunting individual bucks. So when I'm hunting individual bucks and I'm scouting those deer, then I'm looking where they're spending their time, and where they're bedding doesn't vary very much, regardless of where the acorn crop is, which is one thing that I like. I'm just looking for spots, really close to there, because I'm telling you, especially during early season, if you are not extremely close to where that deer is spending most of his daylight hours, you have almost zero chance of seeing that deer outside the rut. And really and truly, up until early December, seems like, even during the rut around here, those bucks, the older age class ones, I'm talking 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old deer, they just don't leave the cover of where they're bedding very much, And so I want to be really close to that. So, during my winter scouting, I'm able to locate those type of areas, or at least I feel like that's where they're at, And and then I'm just looking around the perimeter of those places. I have a pretty good idea of what direction he's going to be going, So I'm just looking for the right tree. And, of course, there's going to be light trails and, rubs and scrapes that's going to tip me off to where he's actually traveling through. And also, I know that those older age class bucks, when they move through any area, they're not going to move through like other deer do. So, I've done this so much now that I know kind of where to look for those little travel routes that they might come through, And generally it's not on top of a ridge. Generally it's off to the side of it. And most of the time it's on the downwind side, but not always, Sometimes the upwind side is actually where the cover is at. And sometimes they'll travel through there too, But you just get a feel for how those deer move through those type of places. And I look for those and set up in those. So, and a lot of times I'll prep trees in those type of places.
Mm-hmm. Let me give an example and tell me how I can get better. So I killed a buck a few years ago on this isolated ridge, and it was not a spot I was going to, but I was coming in the back door, and this spot was not even halfway. And I pulled it up on the map, and I was thinking, man, okay, well, I can either just hop over this ridge. I mean, it was kind of a climb up for around here. And I was like, or I could walk around the point, but man, I could save so much time if I just walk over the ridge. And so I go in, I come across a super hot scrape, super fresh. I'm like, okay, and then I make my way down a little bit, try to get a little bit easier climb. And I run across like 2 or 3 more. And then in the middle of that isolated point was, I would call it the primary scrape. And there were just fresh rubs everywhere. I mean, pee in the scrape and everything. And so I just dropped back, I had the wind in my face. So it's kind of like a northwest wind, actually blowing a little perpendicular to the ridge, not down the point. And I dropped back and I was like, okay, I can sit here. And when the thermals kick in, it'll just keep going the same way, basically. And it was a pretty good little military crest and just kind of dropped off. 45 minutes later, it was one of those moments I've talked about on here before, where you just happen to be looking in the right spot at the right time. And I watched him stand up like 60 yards out. And there was a doe, I caught movement of a doe, and she was eating acorns on the right along the military crest, a little bit further down. Nathan, I watched him for 45 minutes and he moved about 30 yards. Mm-hmm. In 40 something minutes. He was coming downwind of that scrape. And actually when he turned to go check this, he was checking the scrape. And if you had a camera on that scrape, you never would have got a picture of him. But he did turn to go in, and that's when I shot him. But so when you were talking about earlier, how do you see him leave that bed? Down the point or along that military crest or what?
Oh, along the military crest for sure. Yeah, the only time that I really see them diving off the point is if they're going to lose elevation, to go down off the mountain or down off the ridge. But otherwise, yeah, they'll come right around that military crest, and they'll enter to the where they're bedding during the mornings in the same fashion, So, but most of the places that I'm hunting is on north-facing slopes or northeast or east, so any of those combinations. So, a lot of times thermals in those type of locations never rise. They're always dropping. And so, they're able to take advantage of, that air movement coming from the top of the mountain, both in the evenings and in the mornings. So, it really if they're moving toward the top of the mountain, it's just always working for them, But if you set up just in below where you expect them to come, then they can come through there and move through with confidence, and you're set up, without any fear of them, busting out there, because they know that you're there, So
yeah, that's just one thing I've always struggled with is like, man, I've got this thing figured out, and that story earlier, I really just lucked into it. I literally lucked into it, and I just happened to set back where he was. But it taught me so much. I mean, I think that's a good proof of time in the field will teach you. But I've always struggled with like, where's he going to leave? Like I know where he's bedded. Like I can see his bed, but is he going to go straight down the point? He's going to walk off like a ramp. Is he going to walk this military crest? Is he going to walk down the middle of the ridge, which I never see?
They're very calculated, a lot more so than other deer whenever they move. They move very purposefully. And sometimes we see them do things that we don't understand that they're doing, but whatever they're doing is on purpose. But, whenever I'm setting up in a spot, and if you think about it, if you set up to the down, let's just say you're hunting a saddle or anything like that, and you set up to the downwind side of it, you're automatically putting yourself in position to encounter that deer, because when he comes through there, 9 times out of 10, he's doing the same thing you're doing. He's coming through the downwind side of whatever that terrain feature is, because he wants to know what's there before he comes through, So if you do the same thing, you're automatically putting yourself in position to take advantage of how he's moving through there.
Yeah. I watched a video of you explaining that, and you're in a saddle and you're talking about how he's going to walk a little bit lower. He's not going to cut through, textbook saddle work.
Yeah. Well, most other deer will move right through the middle of that saddle, or, fairly close to the middle of it. But these older age class bucks, they just won't do that. And I don't know whether it's being educated from hunters that's made them, do that, or if it's just, I feel like that it's more they're, antisocial. That's the way that, it's just like us guys. The older we get, the more antisocial we get. I know.
So that is normal. That is normal for me.
So, and it's just like your old dog. Once they get older, they just lay around on the porch, and another dog may come in the yard or something other, and they may do something and they may not. But 9 times out of 10, he may just lay there. And I think older age class bucks are the same way. They're educated. They know what's going on. They don't have to go investigate like other deer do. It's just like scrapes. And you mentioned a while ago that that buck coming into that scrape, that he may have not even actually came to that scrape. He can stay downwind of that and know everything that's going on. Other deer that comes to it. He knows, who's been there, who, and you may have had a trail camera watching that and never even knew that he came through the area, so,
right.
But, a lot of times, they will after the cover of darkness. I've actually seen bucks, here in Virginia, we don't see bucks, visiting scrapes during the daylight very much. Now, Ohio, it's a lot different, story, but, anyway, I have actually seen bucks get up from their bed, piddle around, feeding on acorns and stuff, and I'm, hunting a scrape. And then once it gets too dark to shoot, then I'll hear them walk into the scrape and work the scrape and then walk off, But other times, I've ran cameras over scrapes and never get a big deer there, but I'll go in and hunt it anyway, and then witness a big buck actually there and come through just downwind of the scrape. And but he was scent checking that scrape, but yet he never did go to it. So,
yeah, and that's one of those things. Until I saw it, I even had a lot of great mentors telling me that, and you read about it a lot. But when you do see it, it's kind of that moment where the light bulb goes off, and you're like, "This is a different animal. It's a different animal." I like what you said. Like, they're just kind of they are very solitary creatures, but I'm feeling the traditional archery bug, Nathan, like bad. And what I'm loving about it? I've been doing it for like 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm getting more comfortable with it, at like 10 yards. Mm-hmm. And I'm loving the simplicity of it, man. So talk about how you got into traditional bow hunting. Did you grow up doing that?
No. I mean, my first bow was just a dogwood limb that my grandpa cut out of a dogwood tree behind the house and tied a string to. Yeah. And I can remember shooting grasshoppers on the bank behind the house with it. But and then my dad bought me a little Ben Pearson compound, just like a 15-pound bow, But no, I actually didn't get into traditional archery until probably 91, 92, somewhere through there. And but I know you guys have probably heard of Alan Altizer, maybe if you're. But back in those days, that's what he was hunting with, and some of his videos, he was, you'd see him killing deer with them, and that's kind of what really made me fall in love with them. And then, Traditional Bow Hunter magazine, it came out, I think, probably 88, 89, somewhere through there, and just buying those magazines off the magazine rack at the store, looking through it, it just added to it. And but eventually I ended up buying I think it was a Bighorn recurve, one of Fred Asbell's original ones that he used to build. And I shot it for a couple of years, and then ordered a Black Widow bow and shot it for a little while. But back in those days, I wasn't as good a shot with them as I am now. I'm not saying that I'm some great shot or anything, but I'm a whole lot more confident now than I was back then. And the reason is I just didn't have anybody to help me get started, and I created a lot of bad habits. So I was bouncing back and forth between hunting with a compound and a recurve, up through the 90s and through the early 2000s and stuff. And but once I got some actually help from YouTube, I can't remember the guy's name, but anyhow, there was some pretty good tutorials on YouTube, and I started watching those, and I was able to kick some of my bad habits. If you put the work into it and get your confidence up, then it's easy to lay down that compound.
Hey, we're taking just a quick little break to tell you about the official HuntBetter Field Guide. If you've ever wanted to tag along with guys like Nathan Killen, Andy May, and Steve Shirk and see exactly what they're looking for in the woods, then you should definitely check out the Field Guide over at HuntBetter. It's full of short-form videos directly from some of the best hunters in the country. You'll learn exactly what they're looking for when they're scouting, what kind of sign they key in on. You'll learn how they prep spots to hunt, and just so much more. It really is a gold mine of expert content right at your fingertips. So all of that and more is waiting for you over at huntbetter.us. And we're happy to give our faithful podcast listeners 30% off any membership with code podcast30 because, well, you guys are awesome and we want to reciprocate that awesomeness. So check out huntbetter.us, use code podcast30, all caps, join the HuntBetter community and start learning from some of the best hunters in the country. Let's get back to the show. Okay, so we're going to jump into some questions here. Hi, Nathan. You've mentioned in a previous podcast that you can find a good spot without seeing any sign. What are you looking for when there is no sign?
Well, I mean, there's going to be some sign, but it's going to be sign made by a specific buck. That's what I'm looking for, and because from my experience hunting the area or the spots that have a lot of sign, generally you're not going to see the buck that you're looking for. So let's go back to the winter scouting and actually trail cameras. I'm going to and running your trail cameras on video mode will help you learn specific things about an individual buck. And the reason I say that is just actually here a couple months ago, I found a buck here in Virginia that I'm going to be targeting this fall. Well, I actually watched him use the bathroom on the camera. So I immediately went and looked at his droppings, and his droppings are very distinct. So during this past shed season, whenever I was out shed hunting, looking for his sheds and scouting for specific sign of his, I was able to identify his droppings, and see the difference between his versus the other deer. So now I know trails that he's been on, the ones he hasn't been on, where he's been, where he hasn't been. And I can tell you, big bucks, they'll use areas different than other deer. So, I've seen his sign in places that there is almost no sign of other deer. So, whenever I say places with little deer sign, that's what I'm talking about. You're looking for those places that deer, very specific, is using that are separate from other deer, and those are the type of places that you want to set up in to kill him, because they're solitary creatures, so if you're hunting where most of the deer sign is, that's probably not where he's going to be. So you need to try to locate, sign that very specific deer has been making. And once you start hunting individual deer, and then you start picking apart their sign versus other deer sign, and you're able to identify those areas that he's going to be in, so just stay away from those places that have the heavy sign, and start looking for the sign that only he is making. And once you do that, then you're going to realize that he's not where the other deer are at, not during daylight hours.
And then pray that Nathan Killen never starts hunting you. That's insane, Nathan. Rich, yeah. I bet you were not expecting that answer. I wasn't expecting that answer. That's amazing. I never would have thought that. Targeting very specific animals, the way that you scout changes. And you're no longer looking for deer sign. You're looking for sign that's made by that specific deer. And running your trail cameras on video mode will help you identify stuff like that. Because, for example, if I was just relying on just pictures of this deer, for one thing, I wouldn't have been able to realize that he left a pile of droppings there for me to, to go look at and know that he done that, And he also has a special antler characteristic that didn't show up in just pictures. His rack had to move around to be able to see an inside point that he has, and it's on his right side. So now whenever I look at rubs, I'm looking for that characteristic that, on the right side of the rub, because, whenever you look at a rub, most of the time you can tell where the deer has been standing. So now the right side of the rubs that he's making has special gouges on that side. The other side may not have deep grooves in it or anything like that, whereas the right side of the rub will. So that tells me, all right, that's him that has left that rub there. So it's just stuff like that. That's pretty incredible. I mean, when you think about it, Rich, your question, and I'm learning this too in this moment, is when you asked, what are you looking for when there is no sign? What's interesting is, Nathan, you're studying those videos. You're not just going, oh, I got this one in the area, or hey, I got a nice buck on this camera. You're dissecting that thing.
Well, you have to. If you want to kill an individual deer, it's just like if you was trying to profile a serial killer or anybody like that. You've got to learn the personality traits of that person, what they're going to do, and any little quirks that they may have. And you do the same thing with deer. I'm not an investigator, but I'm a deer investigator, I guess you could say, but
that's incredible.
You can learn a lot about a buck's personality by trail camera videos and, stuff like that, how he reacts to other deer. Because if you run your cameras on just video or just picture mode, there may be other deer that's actually around him that you would never see in picture mode. Whereas if you have it on video mode and run it for 10 to 20 seconds, you'll realize a lot of times that there might be another buck in the, it's just like this deer, whenever he would come up to work a scrape, I noticed that there might be another buck in the background, and he would just stand there. And if that buck got too close, then he would turn around and act aggressive toward that deer, and he would leave, and then he'd come straight back to that scrape and start working it again, And so that told me that, he's got somewhat of a little bit of an aggressive personality to him. And so it's just stuff like that, that you learn about the deer that can help you actually kill him.
That's amazing. It's cool to think about. I mean, because that is sign. In a way, that's sign. Mm-hmm. It's not rubs or scrapes or anything like that, but you studying that what was it, the kicker you talked about, or the brow, and knowing how that in a way is sign.
Yeah.
He's showing you, he's giving you little pieces of information. And that's what sign is. That's real. So let me ask this, before we jump to another question. What sign are you walking past? And then more importantly, what sign is making you go, oh, this is where it's going to happen?
That's kind of hard to answer. I consider all sign, because all sign is relevant, because, you think about the heavy sign. Well, that's probably where he's going towards at night, but that's not where he's going to be during the day. So if I know where the heavy sign is, and I know where he is spending his daylight hours, then I know the general direction that he's probably going to head, and that's going to help me pick out, where I'm going to try to intercept him, because somewhere along that path, and it's going to be closer to bedding than where the heavy sign is, there's going to be a spot that I feel like that I can, intercept him at, and generally it's, but not always, but generally it's going to be some kind of a terrain feature that I know that he's going to, pass through.
How are you zoning in on that? I mean, you're looking for like a rub line, or you said terrain features? Is that?
Yeah, a rub line, just a faint trail. It's just little clues like that. That his droppings. I want to know pretty much where that deer is going to be bedded. If I don't, then I've not done my homework. And I'm just going to set up in relation to that. And in the direction that I feel like that he's going to travel. There's going to be some kind of sign that he has left that's going to tip me off to where I need to be. And most of the time it's going to be a rub or a scrape or something like that. But most of the time it is a rub, and so I just know, typically where these deer are going to be bedded. They like to bed on those thick points. In my area, I've not hunted Pennsylvania, so I can't speak for up there. But I know down here, we have a lot of mountain laurel and rhododendron, and where a lot of times where he beds, he is going to have some bit of visual, but not all the time. But sometimes, he'll bed in a little bit more open places, and sometimes he won't. So that's kind of hard to nail down. So
if you know where he's bedded, you can kind of, not guess, but you can kind of tell this is how he's going to leave.
Yeah, and if you see him actually do that often enough, you're going to get that gut feeling of how he's going to move through. I can't tell you how many times I have been hunting and I could just visualize how a buck is going to move through, and that's exactly what he does without me even going in that direction. I can tell that here several years ago, there was a buck I was hunting. I named him Twister, and the reason I named him Twister is because he twisted off every tree that he rubbed. He didn't rub big trees, but he rubbed trees, like the size of a broom handle, and the top of them was always laying feet away from the stub sticking up out of the ground. But anyway, I knew that he was, or I felt like he was bedding out on a point, and so this was around the first week of November. I already knew a year ahead of time where I was going to encounter that deer. Well, I didn't even go in there through the October. I waited till a certain 3-day period that I was going to hunt. Weather was good. I went up a tree there where I knew that I was going to encounter him, and I hunted one full day, didn't see him. I hunted the next morning, didn't see him, and I kind of started second-guessing myself, and I was looking over in the direction that I was expecting him to come, and there was a rock over there. And I thought to myself, I need to be over around that rock. So I pulled everything down. I went over to that rock, and I was actually standing on top of that rock. And I thought to myself, no, you need to go get back up that tree. So I went back and got back up that tree. And about 30 minutes before it got dark, I looked over and he's standing at that rock.
Oh, don't second guess.
Yeah. And I could visualize him moving through there. And that's exactly what he done, I tell you, we always, we want to consider a sign, but you also want to consider your gut feeling too, because your gut feeling will tell you a whole lot. And 9 times out of 10, you need to go with that gut feeling more than you do anything else, because I've not done that multiple times and it's bit me.
Yeah, we had Jared Scheffler on last week, and listening to guys like you, to guys like Jared and so many other guys that are consistently successful on these mature animals, they understand a few things better than I think a lot of people. But I'm all about common threads. What's the common factor here? And that is one that is just glaringly obvious the last few weeks. It's just this instinctual thing, instinctual hunting. I like how he put it. And then you bring it up, this gut feeling. It's just like, wow, this is, it's kind of like when you see a certain car for the first time, then you see it everywhere. That's totally how this is going. So I got to keep that in mind. But all right, let's move on to the next question. I could talk to Nathan about this stuff for hours. Let's see. Do some of the areas you hunt have ag on top and drop off into the vast ravine systems? And how would you treat those differently than ag in the bottom and massed up high?
No, none of the areas that I hunt have ag up top. The only thing that I've ever hunted has always been in the bottom. But I think that it would basically be pretty close to the same. You would always have to consider, air movement, because air movement is going to put you in the right spot, because you're considering it to set up to avoid being detected, and the buck is also considering it to make his move into certain areas. So if you always consider air movement, you're going to put yourself in the game for him more than what you probably think that you do. I think the biggest obstacle is putting in the time in those places and being very strategic how you're getting into those places. That's very important. But, as far as agriculture up on top, these bucks are still going to be moving away from that into secure areas, So you're not really going to treat them any differently. You may consider the air movement a little bit different, whereas, in the mornings it's harder to hunt higher, and if your deer is coming up to you, because all your scent is going straight down to the deer until you get that reverse in thermal movement. So it's going to be a little bit different in that aspect versus hunting deer that's moving up, versus deer that's moving down, So that, I don't know how else to explain it that way, but, you're just always considering how the air is moving, and, the deer are going to be doing the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. That was a great question. Do you see mature bucks bedding in the bowls, little points inside the bowls? If so, what's your preferred way to hunt that?
Yeah. Those are really difficult places to hunt, because, you always have swirling wind in those type of places. You've just got to find, you've got to hunt as close as you can get to it without letting him know you're there, and that takes a lot of trial and error too, But generally, in a bowl, you're going to be on a major ridge to the right or the left of, where he might be bedding in there. And also, during the evenings, if he's moving down off of there, going to a lower elevation, if it's on a north-facing slope, then, you could get away with a whole lot more, because sometimes you always have a downdraft. So, that's a pretty safe place to set up. Matter of fact, buck that I killed just past a year in Ohio was in a kind of a spot like that. I hunted low during the evening, and the buck came off one of the ridges, to hit a scrape line. But, bucks that's going to be moving around and out of the bowl, it's a difficult situation, but it's doable. You just have to. It's one of those gut feeling type things. You have to kind of be standing there in the moment to know where to put yourself.
Do you kind of stick to? And this is a broad add-on question, but do you kind of stick to? If you have that bowl and you have that creek bottom or that drainage or whatever, are you mostly approaching with the wind blowing down that channel, basically?
Yeah. I'm coming up the lowest point that I can, during the mornings anyway. And if you don't, I tell people all the time that approaching from the top during the mornings, especially if your deer are coming up from the bottom, that's really not a very good situation. I've never been able to successfully do that. You always have to come up a drainage to the side. In other words, you're approaching from the side, to be able to take advantage of those type of situations.
And you said something. You said something earlier. It may have been when it was just you and me talking to nobody. When you were talking about checking the perimeter. I have a buddy who does that specifically with bowls. And I've asked him, how do you do that? Because he just bounces around those things so methodically, and he uses that same phrasing. He checks the perimeter, and then he can tell how they're either coming down the point and going to the adjacent ridge and going to an ag field or whatever like that. So what did you mean when you said you're checking the perimeter? I think we were talking about isolated ridges at that point, but how are you going in and checking the perimeter? What does that look like for you?
Well, I just find these places during winter scouting. I never hunt places hardly ever that I've never been into. So, whenever I'm in there scouting, I'm identifying where, like say if there's a buck that's bedding, like you was talking about a while ago, in a bowl, maybe on a center point there. I'm checking out the ridges on both sides of that. And I'm just looking for sign that he has made as he's exiting those type of areas. And that's where I'm setting up. And I'm making sure that while I'm hunting it, I'm not allowing my scent to get to him, And a lot of it depends on the direction that he's going. If acorns are up high, he's going to be moving up. If acorns are on a secondary ridge around the side of the mountain and he's heading that direction, every situation is different, and it actually changes every year because most of the time the acorn crop changes every year. Some years it's up high, some years it's down low, some years it might be on this ridge and not the next one, and so it's very, very situational, and you have to be a really good. I always say the best hunters are the best guessers, because you're taking the conditions that day, the knowledge that you have of that area, the knowledge of how big bucks use topography, and then you're making your best guess on where to set up. So, and that's only learned through trial and error and years of experience.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. The big woods is putting the time in. We talked about Bobby Worthington earlier, big rut hunter, but big buck killer too. And he's just going to put the time in like nobody else in the same spot, most likely, But I remember Dan Infalt saying, I think he said, I think more guys would have more success if they just picked up a dart and threw it at a map and sat there sometimes, and just stop overthinking things was his point. Like you got to guess, and that's why they call it hunting. It's not every time it's going to be the jackpot, but some of these big woods books that I have, they kind of talk about that common thread of you're not going to see as many deer in the big woods, and you got to be okay with that, and you got to just keep grinding it out. Okay, let's keep moving through these questions here. Average hunting height in the Ohio hills.
That's an easy one. I just let the cover dictate where I need to be. Sometimes I'm 20 feet, sometimes I'm 10 to 12 feet. So, but the main thing is just get wherever the cover will allow you to get. And If there's no cover there, then I get on the backside of the tree and get as high as I can. So, I see all the time guys, especially guys that's video, and they've got a camera arm hanging off the tree, and they're in this big stand, and they're up a tree that looks like a telephone pole.
Yeah.
I don't know how they kill deer like that. I couldn't do it. Yeah. But these are good questions and stuff. But I tell you, it's really hard to answer them with very specifics, because there's so many variables that influence deer movement, from wind to topography to habitat edges to as simple as a downed tree, and how the deer use your area, and where the food is and where the food isn't, where the cover is, where the cover isn't. So, it's just this big giant puzzle that you need to be able to figure out how to put together, and they're all different puzzles. No two are the same.
Yeah.
And it's hard to give a very specific answer to these questions without, unless you're standing there, you can't give a good, accurate answer. So.
Yeah. And that's another, speaking of common threads, man, I'm so glad that these common threads are coming up so early in, the history of these shows here, because that common thread is exactly what you're saying. Andy May is going to tell you that. Justin Wright's going to tell you that. Jared Scheffler told us that last week, that I think everybody, including me, we're wanting that answer, especially early on. If, 5 years ago, I was like, man, just tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. I'll work as hard as you need to, just tell me what. Yeah. And it's like, guys were telling me, and I'm so thankful for it, because it took a while for that to be drilled in. Is, hey, it's so situational, but that's the answer. That's the answer. We're wanting another simple answer, or what's it's A, B, C, or D. Which one is it? And it's just not the case. Take each situation, take what you've learned from people, and then, like what you said, you got to make your best guess and be okay with it. Yeah.
The way that I'll approach it is whenever let's say that I'm scouting my way into where I'm wanting to hunt, whenever I come into a spot that I think this looks good, I know that that area over there maybe is where the buck bedding, so what goes through my mind is, okay, what's the air movement, prevailing wind, thermal, whatever it is, how is that going to affect this spot that I want to hunt? Where is the most likely direct, or how is the buck most likely to move through here? So with those elements, make the best educated guess that you can where to set up and hunt it, So, and the more that you do it, the easier it gets. The more mature animals you see move through the timber or the woods, the easier it is, or the better it's going to be for you to be able to guess or visualize how that deer is going to move through, So.
Yeah, and I think you're just pointing to woodsmanship, and I think that's a good kind of a segue to talk about what woodsmanship means to you. And I think one of the biggest hurdles we see today, and I use that term broadly, with YouTube, with just, any kind of information you want right at your fingertips, for better or for worse. You can just get overloaded with information, overloaded with advice. And we're just starting to get away from this woodsmanship, hey, let the woods teach you. Another common thread is that all you guys that are just killing bucks like crazy, you're always still learning. And I think that's the heart of HuntBetter, is that all of us should still be learning. All of us should still be standing on that foundation of woodsmanship. So back to my question before I kept rambling, what is woodsmanship to you? And how do you kind of preserve that yourself?
Just trying to limit technology that I use. The more technology you inject into your hunting, I think it dulls down the woodsmanship aspect of it. And I'm going to use trail cameras for example. I keep telling myself that I'm going to get away from trail cameras, but I love using them, especially whenever I find an individual buck. Then I just want to buy more trail cameras because I'm trying to figure out everywhere he goes. Mm-hmm. But the problem with trail cameras is it's almost like looking through a microscope versus a pair of binoculars. The trail camera would be more like the binoculars. Your woodsmanship, as far as walking around, looking at the sign and dissecting everything that is going around, is more of the microscope view of things, or that's the way that I look at it. So a lot of times when you're scouting, you may just come into this spot and you're not really looking at everything really closely, and you're just throwing up a trail camera, and you're relying on what that trail camera is telling you, whenever you should be looking at every little detail of that spot, and then let the trail camera verify what you think. So, but, woodsmanship to me is just being as close and in tune with the area and the animals within the area as possible, So, technology is a good thing, but only if you use it correctly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's what we've been saying at HuntBetter is like, we don't want anybody to think, when we first started, we're like, man, we don't want people to think we're putting anything down, because we're really not. Because we use those things. We use trail cameras, and we're not taking away from any of those things. If you use those things, that's great. We use them, but always stand on the foundation of woodsmanship. You cannot get away from that and improve as a true hunter, I believe. And it's so fun. I've been hunting since I was 7 years old, and there's still so much to learn. There's so much to learn. I think it's easy to learn the trail cameras. It's easy to learn the gear. It's easy to learn, all the apps that are out there now. It's easy to read all the articles. But the hardest thing to master, I think, is the woodsmanship.
Yeah, and just like trail cameras, running them on video mode, using what you see on video mode to enhance your woodsmanship or learn about that individual animal. That's woodsmanship,
Nathan, dude, thanks for being here. Thanks for working through the technical difficulty. That just means we're going to have to do it again, man.
Sounds good.
Hey, so tell everybody how we can best support you. Tell us what's up with the Stick Boys and how we can support them.
You just give us a follow. You can find the Stick Boys on YouTube, of course, and then find us on Instagram. That's all I have is just the Instagram account, but you can find the Stick Boys on Instagram and Facebook. But we'd appreciate that.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Well, dude, thanks for being here. You're a wealth of knowledge. We barely scratched the surface, man.
Yeah, well, I wished I was better with the exact questions, but I'm not. It's hard to give an exact answer to situational type places.
But you know what? I think, Nathan, I really do. I think that is the best answer you can give. And I think that's what, I'm speaking for guys like myself. That's what we need to hear. And I'm just now kind of coming around that where it's like, oh, that is the answer.
Just learn how air movement, prevailing wind, or thermal air movement can affect or hurt your hunt. And you can use it to predict where the deer will be, and just learn to visualize how a buck is going to use the terrain, because he uses it differently than other deer do. I promise you, he does. And just get out there and do it. Make mistakes, learn from them, and before you know it, you'll have several years under your belt, and you'll be making a lot better decisions. And if you're not getting what you're wanting from what you're doing, change. Change what you're doing. Do something different. Doing the same thing over and over is the definition of insanity. So you don't want to do that.
I'm great at it. Awesome. Well, hey, man, that's a good place to end. Words of wisdom there. Hey, you guys, thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting HuntBetter. Remember, hunt harder, hunt smarter. We'll see you next week.